It was in the later years of my association with Sherlock Holmes that there occurred an affair which for many reasons I hesitated long to place upon the record. The case touched both the honour of a brave officer of the law and certain devices of the modern theatre which, if too plainly described, might tempt the ingenuity of the wicked rather than serve as a warning. Yet now that time has softened personal considerations and the machinery in question has become familiar to the public, I judge that the narrative may at last be safely told. I have ventured to entitle it The Adventure of the Second Lestrade, and those who know the dry little inspector of the yard may well imagine the bitterness with which he found himself confronted by his own counterfeits. The matter began, so far as Holmes and I were concerned, upon a bleak afternoon in Baker Street, when a low grey sky hung over London and the rain crept in thin, chill lines down the panes of our sitting room. Holmes lay at full length upon the sofa, his long, nervous form coiled like a resting greyhound, while his keen eyes followed the coils of smoke that rose from his pipe and drifted in fantastic wreaths toward the ceiling. I had that day been occupied in sorting certain notes of our earlier adventures, and was half inclined to reproach him for the indolence which of late had begun to steal upon him in the intervals of his more strenuous cases. Before I could frame my remark, there came a quick, decided rap at the door of the sitting room, and Mrs. Hudson thrust in her head with an air of some importance.
"A gentleman to see you, sir, and if you will excuse me for saying so, he looks sadly in need of a chair and a cup of tea."
Holmes shot a swift glance at me, and I saw the sudden brightening of his features which told of the approach of a problem.
"Since you have already admitted him to the house, Mrs. Hudson, you may as well complete the offence by showing him up."
The good woman vanished, and a moment later our visitor entered, closing the door behind him with a hand that trembled more than its owner perhaps supposed. I sprang to my feet with an exclamation of surprise, for in the stooping figure, the sharp, eager face, and the bird-like nose I recognised our old ally, Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard. Yet I had never before seen him in such a condition. His usually neat attire was splashed with mud, and stained at the cuff by some darker smear. His eyes were shadowed by heavy lines, and there clung about his person a faint, acrid odour, which I could not at once define.
"You will forgive this intrusion, Mr. Holmes, and you also, Doctor, but I have come to you in no common difficulty."
"Pray sit down, Lestrade, and let us dispense with apologies, for the mud upon your boots and the gas upon your coat are already pleading most eloquently on your behalf."
Lestrade stared at him in a kind of weary amazement, and then sank into the chair which I drew forward for him.
"Gas upon my coat, you say? Well, I have had enough of gas these last hours to last me for the rest of my life."
"You have spent part of the night not upon your usual beat of sordid crime in the East End, but somewhere near the river, and more particularly in the neighbourhood of the Strand. You have been inside a building in which a powerful artificial light is used, and that light is employed in the projection of moving images."
Lestrade half rose from his chair, his eyes starting.
"Then you know it already. They told me no man could help me, not even you, but if you can say as much as that from the look of me, then there may yet be a chance."
"We will hope for more than a chance. You have come from a theatre on the Strand or its immediate vicinity, one that has lately added to its attractions a cinematograph, and if I am not much mistaken, the affair which has so shaken your nerves concerns the death of a gentleman of title in a private box."
The inspector looked at him in a kind of grim despair.
"It is true, every word of it is true, and yet I had thought that my trouble was of a kind that could not be guessed at even by you."
"Pray give us the facts, and as briefly as you can contrive. The details may be added later, but your position must be made clear at once."
"Very well, then. You have already named the place where it begins. It is the Imperial Theatre in the Strand, one of those show houses that have lately taken to mixing the old drama with the new machinery, and which think that the public will swallow anything so long as there is a ghost upon the gauze and a flicker of pictures upon the wall. 3 nights ago a new piece was produced there, a lurid thing called The Veiled Prophet, and the management had spent a small fortune upon certain effects which they were advised would draw the town. Among these was a great figure projected upon a curtain and a bank of mist that rolled in from the wings and even, so they boasted, into the front of the boxes."
Holmes nodded slightly and his eyes half closed.
"You speak like a man who has been behind the scenes."
"I have been behind them more than once of late." The fact is, we had information that some of the card sharpers who ply their trade in the theatre saloons were using the Imperial as their hunting ground, and I had made 1 or 2 quiet visits there in consequence. It was upon one such visit that I first made the acquaintance of a certain Mr. Oliver Selby, who is engaged by the theatre as a kind of scientific adviser, and who has the charge of the chemical and optical contrivances. But I am wandering from my point. 2 nights ago, during the performance of this same piece, a man died in one of the boxes, and that man was Sir Felix Harbury, a baronet and a heavy speculator who had of late been much mixed up with the finances of the theatre.
Lestrade drew a deep breath before continuing, and I saw the beads of moisture that had gathered upon his forehead.
The doctors are not agreed as to the cause, or so they say, but I have seen sudden death in many forms, and I tell you that Sir Felix died like a man who has taken a deadly poison. His lips were discoloured, his features twisted as if by a sharp convulsion, and there was a faint smell about him which I can only describe as bitter and choking. That, however, is not the worst for me. The worst is that 3 witnesses, all of them respectable, are prepared to swear that I, Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard, was seen that night in the projection loft of the Imperial Theatre, that I ordered changes in the chemicals used for the mist effect, and that I left the place only a little before Sir Felix collapsed in his box.
Holmes sat upright upon the sofa, his long fingers interlaced, his eyes fixed and intent.
And where were you in fact at that time?
I was in Camden Town, watching the back door of a public house where we believed a missing clerk might attempt to communicate with his associates. I have constables who will swear to my presence there, a tram conductor who remembers my questions, and a landlady who brought us coffee and can describe my very words to her. Yet you know how juries and the public love a sensation. If the management of the Imperial puts forward their story and the newspapers catch at the notion of a detective who kills under the pretense of duty, my sworn evidence will seem like the thinnest alibi.
You're accused then not only of murder, but of making your uniform a cloak for that murder.
I'm not yet formally accused, but I am suspended from duty pending an inquiry, and there are men at the yard who would not weep to see me fall. They say that my face was seen, that my voice was heard, that I even signed a note in the accounts book of the theatre as a record of my visit. It is as if some evil shadow of myself had been let loose upon the town.
Holmes was silent for a little, his gaze fixed upon the fire, while the thin blue smoke rose slowly from his pipe.
This is indeed a curious inversion of our usual relations with the yard. Commonly we are asked to produce the criminal. Now it seems that our task is to discover the man who is not you and yet has contrived to be you in the eyes of honest folk. You mentioned a note signed in your name. Did you see it?
I did, and it turned my blood cold. It was a short memorandum acknowledging the inspection of the projection apparatus, and it bore a clumsy imitation of my signature, clumsy I say, and yet near enough to pass with those who know it only from official papers.
Well, we shall see what may be made of that. Tell me, Lestrade, when you visited this theatre upon your lawful occasions, did you make yourself known widely to the staff?
I kept myself as quiet as possible, yet it is hard for a man in my position to move anywhere without a certain amount of attention. The manager, Mr. Albert Cording, knew who I was, and so did his daughter, Miss Alice Cording, who plays the leading part in their piece. There was also the projectionist, a young fellow named Gideon Pike, and Mr. Selby, of whom I have already spoken. The stage doorkeeper and 1 or 2 dressers would have heard my name.
So that a man with your height, your build, and nose not unlike your own, and a knack of catching your manner of speech might pass their own question so long as he called himself by your title.
That is what I fear has been done. It is as though my very shadow had stepped out before me and played some monstrous prank.
Shadows do not move without a body to cast them, Lestrade. We shall endeavour to lay our hands upon that body. Doctor, you will accompany us.
I expressed my readiness, for my curiosity and my sympathy were equally aroused by the inspector's plight. Holmes rose and took from behind the curtain his well-worn overcoat and deerstalker.
We shall go first to the theatre, Lestrade, and examine the ground while the traces are still tolerably fresh. You will walk a little in advance of us when we approach, for I am curious to note the manner of your reception.
A few minutes later, we were rattling down Baker Street in a cab, while the November drizzle blurred the outlines of the houses and made the gas lamps shine dully through a mist of reflected light. Lestrade sat opposite us, his thin hands clasped between his knees, and I saw more than once that his lips moved as if he were repeating some argument or defence that he might soon be called upon to make. Holmes, for his part, was sunk in one of those profound reveries from which it was useless to attempt to rouse him, and I contented myself with watching the grey streets roll by until at last the sudden blaze from a line of shop fronts and the throng of cabs and omnibuses told us that we had reached the Strand. The Imperial Theatre presented a brave enough frontage to the world with its flaring posters and glittering lamps, but in the daytime, when we saw it, there was a certain shabbiness in the paint and plaster which the night concealed. Lestrade led the way through a side door where a stout man with a red face and a pencil behind his ear came forward with an air of anxious importance.
Inspector, you are back sooner than I expected, and I can assure you that the company is much disturbed by these rumours in the press.
His voice faltered as his eyes took in Holmes and myself, and a look almost of terror crossed his features.
Good Lord, I could have sworn you had just left us not 3 hours ago.
That is precisely the difficulty, Mr. Cording. You took me for myself when it was not I. This gentleman is Mr. Sherlock Holmes, and this is Dr. Watson. They are here to see that justice is done, if it can be done, for me as well as for your dead patron.
The manager bowed with a kind of bewildered respect, his eyes travelling from Lestrade to Holmes as if he were comparing their features with some image in his memory.
You must understand, Mr. Holmes, that we have been placed in a most cruel position. Sir Felix was the chief backer of this theatre, and his death has already alarmed the investors. If it should be said that he died by foul means, and that the instrument of that foulness was one of our own boasted effects, the damage to our reputation would be incalculable.
I can well imagine it, Mr. Cording. At the same time, you will agree that the reputation of an officer of the law is a matter of some consequence to the public also. We are here to discover the truth, not to manufacture a pleasing version of it for the newspapers. You will oblige me by taking us to the projection loft and by answering such questions as I may find it necessary to put to you.
The manager seemed about to protest, but something in Holmes's cold, incisive manner checked him, and he turned to lead the way along a narrow, ill-lit corridor and up a steep flight of wooden stairs. As we mounted, a faint, pungent odour grew more perceptible, and I saw Holmes's nostrils dilate like those of a hound upon a trail. At the top was a small landing from which a door opened into a cramped chamber, hot and close even on that chill day, where a heavy metal apparatus, a lamp, and a reel of film occupied the centre of the floor. Behind it ran a lattice of pipes and valves leading toward the stage and the front of the house. A young man in a stained blouse and spectacles looked up from the adjustment of a gear and started at the sight of Lestrade.
So you are back again, sir. I'm with friends this time. I had half expected you, though the piece is not called till evening.
I have not been here since yesterday morning, Pike, and I tell you plainly that if a man stood where you stand and called himself by my name, he is a criminal whom we intend to lay by the heels.
The projectionist stared from one to another of us, his jaw fallen.
Then who was it that came and handled the lamp and the valves and the bottles and gave me his card from the yard? He spoke like you, he looked like you, and he signed the book downstairs with your hand.
You will kindly answer our questions, Mr. Pike, and leave the dissection of your memories to a later hour. When did this man first present himself?
It was 2 hours before the curtain time, sir, on the very night when Sir Felix died. He came up here with Mr. Cording and Mr. Selby, the gentleman who manages the chemical effects, and he told me that certain experiments were being made by order of the police.
What sort of experiments?
The young man pointed with a stained hand to the tangle of pipes.
He said that there had been complaints of fumes in the upper circle, and that he wished to see whether the mist could be thickened on the stage and kept out of the gallery. Mr. Selby and I showed him the apparatus, and he had us change the mixture in the reservoir that leads to the ducts.
Describe this apparatus to me as clearly as you can.
The young man pointed with a stained hand to the tangle of pipes.
The lamp heats this small chamber, sir, and the vapour from the chemicals is drawn along that pipe and down into the channels under the stage. From there it passes out through little grates along the front and also through special vents that lead to the lower boxes so that the mist can be made to creep up the walls or roll out over the ledges as the scene requires.
And you altered the mixture at the request of this supposed inspector?
Yes, sir. He brought with him a bottle from Mr. Selby's store, a clear liquid with a strong smell to it, and had me add it to the usual solution. He said it would make the mist hang lower and thicker.
Holmes bent over the small reservoir, his long fingers touching the metal with a delicacy that reminded me of a musician upon the keys.
He sniffed once or twice and then drew from his pocket a small lens with which he examined the inner surface.
There are slight crystals clinging here which are of some interest, Watson. You will observe also the faint discoloration of the brass.
I looked where he'd indicated and could indeed perceive a dull stain and minute shining points. The acrid odour that filled the little room seemed to grow more oppressive.
Tell me, Mr. Pike, from which part of the house was a mist directed most strongly during the final scene?
To the stage and to the lower boxes, sir, more especially to the one that Sir Felix used. He liked his effects strong, did Sir Felix, and Mr. Cording always told me to give him plenty of ghosts, if you understand me.
I understand you perfectly. And you, Mr. Cording, where were you during the last act?
I was between the wings, Mr. Holmes, watching the cues and seeing that the scene changes went smoothly. I saw Sir Felix in his box once or twice, and he seemed in his usual spirits till near the end.
You did not approach the projection loft after this man, whom you took for Lestrade, had left it?
No, sir, I was too much engaged with the company.
Holmes straightened himself and turned to the theatre manager with an air of cold command.
I must see the box that Sir Felix occupied and the ducts that serve it. Also, I shall require to view the stage from their position while your cinematograph is in action and your mist so far as may be safe in operation.
The manager looked uneasy.
If there is danger in the fumes, Mr. Holmes, I should wish to avoid exposing the company to them again.
You may dismiss her fear for the present, since I do not propose that your reservoir shall contain anything more deadly than hot water until I know precisely what passed through it on the night in question. We shall find some means of representing your ghost without endangering your takings.
A wan smile crossed the manager's face, and he led us down once more through the passages to the grand tier.
Sir Felix's box was upon the right hand as one faced the stage, and a faint odour still lingered there which I now recognised as identical with that in the loft, though more diluted. Holmes went down upon his knees and examined the panelling, the carpet, and the inner ledge with his usual tireless care.
Here is the outlet of the duct you see, Watson, cunningly masked by this ornament. Note the faint blue line about the metal, as though some corrosive vapour had passed that way more than once.
He rose and looked out over the curve of the house toward the stage, where the drop scene hung before the empty boards.
When your ghost appears, Mr. Cording, and your mist creeps forth, how is the light distributed?
The great figure is thrown upon a gauze in front of the actors, Mr. Holmes, and the beam of the lamp spreads beyond it so that one sees the shadow moving up the pillars and into the side arches. It is a most telling effect when the house is full and the music is playing.
I will see it with my own eyes and judge how far it may also be a most misleading effect.
Arrangements were speedily made for a partial rehearsal of the scene. The company, eager and curious, took their places, while we three remained in Sir Felix's box. The lamp in the projection loft was lit, the reel began to whir, and presently the vast, dim figure, waving its arms in slow, solemn rhythm, grew out of the gloom of the stage and towered over the players. At the same instant a thin vapour crept along the boards and curled like a living thing about the feet of the actors and the lower rail of our box. Even though I knew that the reservoir held nothing more harmful than heated water, I confess that a little shiver passed through me as I saw the uncanny motion of those pale wreaths. The great shadow spread and distorted itself as it climbed, so that its head seemed for an instant to loom upon the inner wall of the box itself, and a wavering silhouette of a human profile showed for a second upon the panel of the corridor door. Holmes touched my arm.
You perceive, Watson, how easily a frightened young lady, glancing round in such a moment, might imagine that she had seen the face of a man whom she believed to be upon her side.
I nodded, remembering that Lestrade had spoken of Miss Cording's testimony.
When the lamps were turned up once more and the mist dispersed, we left a box and passed into the corridor behind it. Here Holmes examined not only the door and its frame, but also a small table on which lay a few programs and a tray.
The witnesses who swear to having seen you, Lestrade, did they all see you from the front?
One saw me, as she thought, in this very corridor, and another from the far end of it, when he said I was going toward the loft.
Which was the lady?
Miss Alice Cording. She is a nervous young woman, easily affected by talk of ghosts, but she is honest enough.
I shall judge for myself of her nerves and her honesty. You will ask her to favour us with a few minutes of her time, Mr. Cording.
We were shown presently into a small retiring room prettily furnished, where a young lady rose at our entrance. She was pale, with large dark eyes and a sensitive mouth, and I could well believe that she was quick to feel both terror and pity.
They tell me you are Mr. Sherlock Holmes. If you can clear this dreadful mystery, sir, and above all, if you can clear the name of Inspector Lestrade, you will take a great load from my mind.
You have confidence in the inspector?
Entirely, sir. He has always been considerate to us here, and I cannot think that he would do harm to any man.
Yet you have stated that you saw him on the night of the tragedy near your father's box.
I thought that I saw him, sir. That is the misery of it. It was at the very moment when the ghost stood tallest upon the stage, and the mist was thickest. I had stepped out for an instant, but the heat within was great, and as I turned my head a shadow fell across the panel of the door. It was shaped like the inspector, with the same sharp nose and stooping shoulders, and I cried out at once that he was there.
Did you see the face in clear light, or only the shadow?
Only the shadow, sir, but it was so like him that I could not doubt it.
Shadows are treacherous things, Miss Cording, and light is a less honest witness than you may suppose. Did you hear the man speak at that moment?
No, sir, not then. I heard his voice earlier, when he came with my father and Mr. Selby to the loft, but then I did not see him plainly.
You have heard him speak on other occasions?
Yes, sir, when he came before, and afterwards when he questioned some of us.
Would you say that the voice you heard in the loft that evening was certainly the same as the inspector's?
At the time I thought so, sir, but since he tells me he was not there, I'm all in confusion.
You described very well the state of mind upon which the criminal in this affair has traded. Thank you, Miss Cording, you have been of service in more ways than you know.
The young actress looked half relieved, half bewildered, and we left her to the care of her anxieties. Holmes remained silent as we returned to the stalls, but I saw by the light in his eyes that some train of thought was rapidly developing in his mind.
We have seen the stage, the loft, the box, and the witnesses whose senses can be misled. There remains for us to see the man whose knowledge cannot be so easily deceived. I speak of Mr. Oliver Selby.
Mr. Cording informed us that Selby had left the theatre and gone to his lodgings in Bloomsbury, pleading a violent headache, and that he had not been seen since the morning after Sir Felix's death. It was decided that we should call upon him there without delay. As we drove, Lestrade gave us further particulars of the dead man.
Sir Felix was a daring speculator, doctor, with a finger in every pie that promised profit. He took a fancy to the theatre as a toy and then used it as a bucket into which to pour the savings of fools who believed in his schemes. There are widows and shopkeepers who have cause to curse his name. It has come to my ears that he had some hold over Mr. Selby also, though I do not yet know its nature.
Holmes nodded slightly.
A man who holds many strings will sometimes pull one too sharply and find it snap in his hand. We shall see whether Sir Felix's last experiment in control has not recoiled upon himself.
Mr. Selby's lodgings were in a dingy street near Russell Square, in a house which bore it out with marks of respectability without the inward comfort that the word implies. A sour-faced landlady answered our knock and informed us that her gentleman was within, though he had given orders that he was not to be disturbed.
Then you will be so obliging as to tell him that Inspector Lestrade is here upon urgent business, and that Mr. Sherlock Holmes accompanies him.
The woman's eyes widened and she withdrew. In a few moments we were shown into a bare sitting room where a man rose from a chair before the fire.
He was tall and stooping, with iron grey hair, a lined, sallow face, and eyes that had once been keen, but were now shadowed and restless.
I have been expecting you, Inspector. When a man has lived as I have lived, he does not need much imagination to foresee the knock upon the door.
You know, then, that Sir Felix Harbury is dead.
I know that he died at the theatre which he controlled, and that the manner of his death has set tongues wagging. I know also that I was in charge of certain apparatus which has been freely connected with the affair. You need not look at me as if I were a ghost, Mr. Holmes, for I am still flesh and blood, though I have known what it is to be branded as a killer.
Holmes's eyes glittered at this unexpected admission.
Ye speak as one who has stood in the dock.
Not in an English dock, sir, though there are continental courts that have heard my name. Years ago, in a laboratory abroad, there was an explosion, a foolish mishandling of volatile compounds, and a man died. The papers made of me a monster, the court pronounced me merely negligent, but the verdict of the world was harsher than that of the law. I came back to England with a broken reputation and a very clear knowledge of what it is to be hunted without mercy.
And then Sir Felix Harbury found you.
Yes, he found me. Men like him have a scent for the wounded. He knew my story before I had finished writing my application for the post, and he told me, with a smile, that he was the one man in London who could give me a new start if I were docile. I was docile, Mr. Holmes, so long as I could be.
And when you ceased to be docile?
Then I ceased also to be safe.
His long fingers twitched upon the mantelpiece, and there was a hunted look about his eyes that stirred my sympathy in spite of my doubts.
You must understand, Mr. Selby, that we are here in part on your account, but in part also on account of this gentleman whose identity appears to have been borrowed with singular boldness. Do you deny that you were present when a man, calling himself Inspector Lestrade, came to the projection loft and ordered changes in your chemical mixture?
I do not deny that I was present, but at the time I believed that man to be what he claimed. I saw him only in a poor light, and my mind was much occupied with my own arrangements. I heard him speak with Mr. Pike, and the voice seemed to me the same that I had heard before from the real inspector.
You knew me, then, by sight and name?
I had seen you more than once about the theatre, Inspector, and my memory for faces is not bad.
You're a chemist, Mr. Selby, and you know as well as I do that men are careless in their use of the word poison. Some poisons are slow, some swift, some act upon the nerves, some upon the blood. Tell me frankly, in your expert opinion, could the vapour from your apparatus, as you prepared it on the night in question, have killed a man seated in Sir Felix's box?
If it were as I prepared it, then no. It would have been irritating, perhaps, and disagreeable, but not deadly. If, however, some more active substance were introduced, it might well become a fatal agent.
And you of all men there knew best how that could be contrived.
That is true, and it is also the truth that I did not contrive it.
Holmes regarded him for a long moment, his face inscrutable.
Your past has made you fear the judgment of the crowd, Mr. Selby, and I do not think you would lightly run the risk of standing once again as the author of a death. Nonetheless, your knowledge and your proximity place you inevitably within the circle of suspicion. You will not leave London until you hear from me again.
I have no desire to run, Mr. Holmes. I have run in us.
As we left the house, Lestrade looked anxiously at Holmes.
Well, what do you make of him?
I make of him a man who was killed once by mischance and who fears to kill again, yet he might under sufficient pressure persuade himself that a second death was in some fashion a continuance of the first, a sort of prolonged accident in self-defence.
The phrase struck me as singular, but Holmes did not at that moment enlarge upon it. For the next 2 days he was engaged in a series of experiments at Baker Street, which taxed my patience, and my lungs, for the sitting room, was full of pungent odours and of small clouds of vapour that issued from retorts and glass tubes. He procured from a chemist certain salts of prussic acid, tested them in minute quantities upon small animals, and measured with delicate instruments the time which the fumes took to manifest their effects. I shall not set down here the precise processes which he employed, for they belong to that dangerous borderland in which science touches crime, and it is no part of my intention to serve as a guide to the latter. It is enough to say that Holmes satisfied himself that a particular solution, when vaporized in a confined space, would produce almost instantaneous collapse in a man seated within range, and that the symptoms would correspond closely with those described by the doctor who had first examined Sir Felix. On the evening of the second day, Lestrade joined us once more, pale with anxiety and warm with suspense.
The inquiry at the yard moves slowly, Mr. Holmes, but it moves. There are those who would gladly see me disgraced, and they are watching your proceedings more closely than they admit. If you have anything for me, for pity's sake speak it.
I have something, though it is not yet complete. I have proved that the apparatus of the Imperial could be made the vehicle of a deadly vapour, and I have proved also that the distribution of that vapour could be so arranged that it would fall most strongly in one chosen box, while the rest of the house would suffer little.
Then you believe that Sir Felix was murdered by means of the mist?
I believe that his death accords remarkably with the properties of a certain compound which I have tested. I believe also that someone acquainted with chemistry and with the disposition of the ducts introduced that compound into the reservoir shortly before the last act.
Then that points straight to Selby.
Not so straight as you suppose. There is the small matter of your second self, Lestrade, a man who borrowed your name and your authority, and who seems to have been the only person who could pass unquestioned to and fro between loft and box.
Lestrade made an impatient movement.
Have you any clue to him?
I have the impression of a face and a voice confused in several memories, and I have the handwriting that professes to be yours and yet betrays another hand beneath the disguise.
He took from his pocket a slip of paper and laid it upon the table. It was the memorandum from the theatre acknowledging the inspection, and I saw at once that while the general form of the signature resembled Lestrade's, there were certain letters whose curves were alien.
You see, Watson, that the writer of this hand habitually forms his lower loops in this manner, whereas our friend cuts his short and sharp. A man may endeavour to imitate another's style, but he will nearly always betray some habits of his own. Compare this now with the note that Mr. Selby scribbled to the manager excusing himself from rehearsal.
He produced a second paper, and I could not but be struck by the resemblance between the disputed letters in the first and the normal letters in the second.
You mean that Selby forged my signature?
I mean that the man who signed for you possessed at the least a handwriting strongly akin to Selby's, and that if it is not his, it is that of some intimate associate. Taken with our other considerations, that is a fact of weight.
Then why do you hesitate?
Because there is more in this than the suppression of a blackmailer. There is a studied choice of method which suggests a mind occupied less with revenge than with the preservation of itself.
Lestrade passed his hand through his hair in perplexity.
I do not follow you.
Ye shall follow me to the Imperial Theatre this night, Lestrade, and there, if I am not mistaken, you shall see the whole crooked line of this business straightened before your eyes.
And so it came about that when the house was once more closed and silent, and the last of the audience had gone its way into the rain-swept streets, a small company remained behind in the gloom of the stalls. There were Holmes and myself, Inspector Lestrade, Mr. Cording, Gideon Pike, and Oliver Selby, who had come unwillingly enough in obedience to a summons that bore the authority of the law. The stage was dimly lit by a few working lamps, and the great curtain drooped like a sleeping thing.
We will spare you the full rehearsal, gentlemen. It is not the ghost upon the gauze that concerns us now, but the ghost that has been walking in Inspector Lestrade's likeness. Mr. Selby, you have told us that you did not alter the composition of your mist in such a way as to make it deadly. I am here to tell you that the mist was deadly, that it was altered, and that the hand which altered it was yours.
Selby started as if struck, and then forced a harsh laugh.
You make long leaps, Mr. Holmes. You had best take care that you do not leap beyond the facts.
On the contrary, I tread very closely upon them. You were a marked man long before you entered this theatre. The accident abroad left you with a load of conscience and with a fear of public judgment that never wholly sleeps. When Sir Felix Harbury discovered your history, he saw in you a tool which he might bend or break at his pleasure. For a time you endured in silence, content to earn your bread in obscurity, but at last the strain became too much. The terms of his control grew harsher, the threats more open, the prospect of exposure more imminent. You began to see in him not merely a tyrant, but a danger to your very existence as a decent man.
He meant to drag my name once more into the gutter. He wrote it plainly. He told me that if I would not surrender the rights to certain inventions and a larger share of my salary, he would send to the societies and the journals every detail of the accident with comments of his own. I told myself that if he were gone, the hunting would cease. I told myself that it was he or I. That is what you mean by self-defense.
That is what you told yourself, but the law does not accept such reasoning. You chose your method with the care that belies any plea of sudden passion. You planned, you disguised, you forged, you adjusted the vowels with scientific nicety. A man might plead self-defense when he snatches a weapon from the hand that threatens him, but not when he spends days in preparing the weapon and luring his victim into range.
I know it, and yet I tell you that in my heart I felt like a man fighting for his life. I have been pursued once, Mr. Holmes, and I would not be pursued again. I would rather have the end at once.
Lestrade stepped forward, his thin face hard, an official once more, though I could see that the personal element in the matter still shook him.
You may tell all that to the judge and the jury, Mr. Selby. For the present, I arrest you on the charge of wilful murder, and I shall be happy to have Mr. Holmes's evidence to back my own.
Selby made no resistance.
He merely bowed his head and allowed the inspector to place a hand upon his arm.
As they moved away together down the dark aisle, I heard him muttering words that sounded like a prayer or a curse.
Holmes stood for a few moments looking after them, then turned to Mr. Cording and the projectionist.
You have heard enough to satisfy you that this unhappy affair is no fault of your theatre or of your honest staff. You will, of course, have to endure some days of sensation, but in the end your house will be the more talked of for having been the scene of so strange a crime.
You take a cool view of it, Mr. Holmes, but I confess I am heartily relieved that the blame does not lie upon our machinery.
Nor upon me, sir. I could not have borne to think that my hand had helped to kill a man.
Your hand turned the valves, Mr. Pike, but your mind did not conceive the use to which they were put. In this world a man's guilt lies not so much in what he does with his fingers as in what he does with his thoughts.
With that characteristic aphorism, Holmes drew his cloak about him and led the way out into the misty street, where a raw wind drove the drizzle before it in fine, stinging lines. We walked for some time in silence, each occupied with his own reflections, until at last Lestrade, who had rejoined us after handing his prisoner over to his men, broke out with an energy that surprised me.
To think that my face should be used as a mask for murder. It is that which I cannot stomach, Mr. Holmes. I have been called a fool more than once in my time, and I dare say I have deserved it, but I never thought to be made a villain even in play.
You are not the first honest man whose features have been borrowed by roguery, Lestrade, nor will you be the last. You may at least console yourself with the reflection that it was the respect which your appearance inspires that made the imposture possible.
It will be a new jest at the yard that there are two of me, one to blunder and the other to hang. They will have their laugh over it.
Let them laugh. There is no more deadly thing for a department than solemnity. As for you, I do not think this episode will damage you in the eyes of those whose opinion is worth having. They will see that a man whom it takes so elaborate a conspiracy to discredit must be of some value.
Lestrade's thin mouth twitched in what was almost a smile.
You are very good, Mr. Holmes. I do not often say it, but I owe you more than I shall ever be able to repay. When I thought that my own name was to be dragged through the mud as Selby's had been, I seemed to see all my years of work turned into so much waste paper.
Names are fragile things, Lestrade, and yet they are the only clothes in which our reputations go abroad. A man will fight harder for a word than for a house.
We parted from the inspector near Charing Cross, and Holmes and I took a cab back to Baker Street, where Mrs. Hudson had thoughtfully kept some supper warm for us. As we sat by the fire afterwards with the lamplight shining on Holmes's lean, eager profile, and the familiar surroundings of our old room about us, I ventured to put into words a thought that had been forming in my mind.
You spoke more than once, Holmes, of self-defense in connection with this case, I said.
Pity is a dangerous luxury in my profession, my dear Watson, yet I should be less than human if I felt nothing for a man who has been hounded for years by his own past. There is a difference, however, between understanding in motive and excusing in act. Selby allowed his fear to become a sort of inverted egotism. He could see nothing in the world but his own terror of disgrace, and so he persuaded himself that the removal of Sir Felix was a defensive measure. The law will take a simpler view and will probably call it murder.
He spoke as if he had been driven into a corner, I remarked.
Many men talk of being driven into corners, Watson, when in truth they have built the walls themselves. Every concession that Selby made to Harbury, every silence that he kept when he should have spoken, every compromise with his own conscience, laid a new brick. At the last he saw no outlet but the crime, yet if he had stood firm at the beginning he might now be a modest but honest chemist, and Sir Felix might be alive.
You lay heavy responsibility upon a frightened man, I said.
I lay responsibility where it belongs. There is a tendency in these times to treat every criminal as the victim of circumstances, of heredity, of anything rather than of his own will. It is a softened view that sits well in drawing rooms, but it does not accord with the facts of my experience. There are, I admit, cases where impulse or disease plays a large part, but here we have cool preparation and the deliberate use of science for destruction.
You spoke of the danger of publishing such methods, I said. Is that why you have wished me to delay this account?
Partly that, and partly because I did not care to see Lestrade's name coupled once more with a scandal, even if only as the man whose mask was stolen. Now that the public has grown accustomed to these theatrical contrivances, the novelty has worn off, and I trust that any would-be imitator of Selby will find less profit in his example.
You have often spoken of the modern world as furnishing subtler tools to the criminal, I observed.
So it does, and it will continue to do so. Every advance in chemistry, in mechanics, in the manipulation of light and sound is a two-edged sword. It offers new weapons to the law and new opportunities to those who break it. The detective of the future will need to know not only the stains of mud and tobacco, but the behavior of vapors, the tricks of lenses, the capacities of engines.
You seem almost to look forward to it, I said.
My mind loves complexity, Watson, but my heart is old-fashioned enough to prefer a simple stick and a straightforward blow to invisible guesses and moving pictures. Give me a footprint in the clay over a path traced in the air.
I smiled at his whimsical expression and rose to knock the ashes from my pipe. As I did so, I could not help reflecting upon the strange irony of the case we had just brought to a close. A man driven half mad by the fear of losing his identity had chosen to save it by stealing it of another. Under the wavering shadow of a projected ghost he had contrived to cast a second, more sinister shadow, that of Inspector Lestrade. One shadow had killed a man, the other had nearly ruined one. Yet in the end it was the clear light of Holmes's reason which dispelled them both. If you have listened with me thus far to this untold case of Sherlock Holmes, then I thank you most sincerely for your patience and your company. I would be very grateful if you would show your appreciation by giving a like to this story and by subscribing to the channel so that you do not miss future adventures. Your thoughts are always of great interest to me, so I warmly invite you to leave a comment and tell me what you found most striking in this investigation. Should you wish to support the continued telling of these untold cases, you can make a donation by using the QR code at the lower right of the video or by following the link in the description. In that description you will also find links to other works from entirely different series, each with its own world and mysteries waiting for your visit. For now I bid you farewell, and I hope that you will join me again soon for another adventure in Untold Cases of Sherlock Holmes.